he published Reset, which explored the causes and aftermath of the Great Recession. Kurt Anderson has also contributed to and edited many other collections, too numerous to mention here. A look at his collective publications reveals a sustained and truly impressive commitment to his craft as a writer and critic. His background leaves him uniquely poised to talk about the changing landscape of journalism, as well as topics that bridge broadcasting and publishing. Tonight he is joined in Converse School of Communication and Media. Merrill came to NSU after a long career in journalism. His early years were spent at the Washington Post, and he has been a consultant and strategist for many media companies. In 1996, he became the first editor-in-chief of been involved with many online and print journalism ventures. Kurt Anderson and Merrill.
Welcome, Kurt, and thank you all for coming. This is a perfect match of the goal of a lecture and a lecturer, Kurt, because there isn't a discipline that the lecturer and our various schools don't stand for that Kurt hasn't worked in. You've heard a little bit, but just keep in mind, novelist, journalist, film screenwriter, producer of television programming, and of course, many of you know him from his radio work. So that's an extraordinary background, and we have a lot of topics to cover, including Kurt's views of the political dialogue at the moment, Kurt's views of where media is going, and Kurt's views of the nature of social change and the kind of world we live in today. And I want to start on that kind of topic and read to the audience something you wrote very recently about the state of the dialogue in the world we live in. Kurt wrote this on a blog post just a couple of weeks ago. In an era where only the rich and powerful and entitled are getting richer and more powerful and entitled, where the perpetrators of catastrophic financial schemes cruise along unpunished, not even shamed, while everybody else tries desperately to stay even, I suppose that people's anger naturally seeks cathartic release wherever it can find it. And overreaction is an inevitable result, which gooses even more overreaction. This is the winter of our discontent, and I don't think it's going to end when the weather gets warm. Kurt, you wrote that a few weeks ago, the weather's getting warmer. Well, are we really that discontented in 2015?
Well, I think so, and that, of course, you know, as anybody studying journalism trade craft should understand, was just a way to end the piece. But I do think that, and I was writing about several different cases of what I was arguing were outsized anger at sort of public anger at, for instance, Brian Williams, which I was trying to figure out why now why this, whatever the degree of feloniousness or not, or wrongness committed by him and other people I was writing about, the reaction seems so extreme now, and you can look at social media as being part of that. But I also think it's just a kind of off with their heads reaction among people who are, angry and feeling unsettled and as though the system is rigged. I do feel that there's more of a sense that the system is rigged by more people of various ideological stripes than any time in my lifetime. Yeah.
And you open this piece by describing the anecdote of a privileged woman in the first class of an international flight complaining about how her hors d'oeuvres weren't quite served properly.
Her nuts.
I was leaving that for you to say, how her hors d'oeuvres were not served warm enough.
Yeah.
So what about privilege? Is there just too much of it? Does New York feel like a place of way too much privilege?
Well, why would you say that? My feeling is not. Yes, it is an era of not only extreme and excessive privilege and wealth, but again, a system that looks by all metrics rigged to have, just look at all of the trend lines of the last 30 years of profits going up and only the people capital rather than labor, getting almost all of the benefits of that. So, the United States is a funny place I don't think Americans do, by and large, historically, over the long haul, have resented the rich, except, why there's never been much of a successful left in this country is people don't want to kill the rich or prevent them from being rich. They want to be rich themselves. Even while that's a long shot for most Americans, they have, even in the last, until relatively recently, I think, this is my sense, I don't have numbers to support it, but until, for the first 20 years or so of this, since the 80s, since this inequality has been increasing so acutely, I think people were still thought, I still got a chance. Maybe it's a casino economy, but I can get lucky. I think, the reality of the longer and longer odds of people and their children having a fair shot has simmered out into the world. So, there have been Gilded Ages before. There will be Gilded Ages again. This one has gone on a long time. The original one, of course, the novel was written in 73, I think, and then there was a big depression in 93, so let's say it lasted 20 years. This one is, except for the recession, the Great Recession, is 30 years and counting. And again, what will come of this, I don't know, but I do feel that I had this idea a few years ago. I've never written about this actually, but that during the time when the rights, mostly the rights opposition to immigration reform and figuring out what we're going to do with 11 million illegal Mexican immigrants and so forth was becoming an animating issue and ugly, I realized that while they were, people spoke of being afraid that the United States was going to become Latinized by virtue of all these tens of millions of people from Central America and Mexico. I suddenly thought, well, no, we're becoming Latinized in an entirely different way. We're becoming Latinized like South America with this oligarchy that runs the show in a sort of shameless fashion and a kind of political process that seems to be becoming corrupted in a way that would have shocked, I think, any of us or our parents 30 or 40 years ago. Citizens United isn't the cause of money corrupting politics. It is a further enabler and symptom of the change of kind of political consensus about what is fair and what is American.
You like chronicling eras. That's a theme in multiple writings of yours.
Seems to be.
Is that an accident, or did you set out to do that?
I set out to do almost nothing in a continuous and theoretical way. I have no doctrine of anything practically.
But what you love, based on an article you wrote in the New York Times very recently, and maybe some of you saw that, you love the 90s.
Well, this was their idea, and at first I thought, this is ridiculous, but then I began thinking about it. So I didn't have the idea. Rare case where somebody else has an idea that I like that, a conceptual essay idea that I then do. But I began actually thinking about it, and then looking at the data and thinking about what happened in culture. And I thought, I didn't love it at the time. Well, actually, I did love it at the time, and that was partly because I had little children, and at the maximum age of cuteness, and I had, I had started a magazine that did well. I had, got a job writing another magazine. It was a good decade for me. But beyond that, in so many ways, I don't think we have fully kind of recognized. Partly because the '90s don't have this shorthand way of thinking about them. Like, the '50s, we know what that was. The '60s, we know what that was. '70s, we know what that was. '90s, I don't know. And it's not just because they're too close. It's because for whatever set of reasons, they don't yet have this sort of mental picture of what they can be reduced to. Yet, the Clinton, just politically and economically, the Clinton administration keeps taking credit, and as the would-be next Clinton administration already takes retroactive credit for the 90s and the reduction of, increased profitability, balanced budget, by almost every metric, the 90s were great. And, independent film started, Pulp Fiction came out, hip-hop broke out big. I mean, it was...
The internet.
There was that. No, exactly. I mean, again, another essay I wrote a couple of years ago about how sort of in most ways, except for the expansion and elaboration of the internet, culturally, I strongly believe we sort of, the pause button was pushed sometime in the mid-90s, and nothing much has happened since. It's all recapitulation of the old for a variety of reasons. And so it was among other things, as I said in the piece, I mean, hip hop was the last important consequential invention of American pop culture. And of course it's invented in the 70s, but it started to rule in the 90s.
We'll stop this historical lament pretty soon, but we have to also talk about the 60s for a minute, because you also wrote about that.
Mm-hmm.
True Believers is a chronicling of at least one snapshot of the 60s. It has both happy endings and sadder endings in it, but you use that as a platform to comment on what the 60s meant long term. It's rather fashionable right now to trash the 60s and say the boomers have failed in multiple ways.
Yeah.
You and I take that very personally, Kurt, I know.
Yeah.
But in your book, you're fairly optimistic, although ambiguous. How do you look at the 60s?
I think fairly optimistic, but ambivalent describes pretty much my take on life.
Okay. But back to the 60s.
Yeah. So what do I think of the 60s? Well, I think what I think about this character, I mean, this is not an essay about the 60s, this novel, it's a novel about a totally made-up set of characters in your story. But thinking about the 60s and researching the 60s and writing this book gave me a different sense of them. I mean, I already had a sense, for instance, as the Tea Party arose, that it's funny that all these, they're not all old, but like many of them are, and wow, these people who were young in the 60s are waiting until they're in their 60s to like act like the new left, like nihilist radicals of a different kind than the new left were. So that interested me. But then as I was promoting the book, even before the book came out, actually, I went to Woodstock, New York, for a book festival there to promote the book, and I was on a panel, and then there were questions afterwards, and somebody, a very Woodstockian sort of guy, asked, 65-year-old, 70-year-old guy, I said, so why did, we won, we meaning, hippies, countercultural people from the 60s, we won on a cultural level, but we lost on an economic level. And I had one, a kind of little aha moment where I realized, no. All libertarianism won, basically in the 1960s, that you can get high, you can sleep with and love whoever you want, and you can make as much money any way you want and keep it. That there was a kind of grand bargain that happened out of the 60s that allowed everybody to do, what was important to them to do, that was not permissible before the 60s. Because before the 60s, growing up, in Omaha, Nebraska, I mean, the kind of egregious, shameless, I don't care what my workers do, attitude was, it existed, no doubt, but it wasn't permitted to be flaunted the way it was then. Just as it wasn't permitted to be, it was difficult to be an out gay person or a black person. All of those things. So what I realized about the 60s is that it enabled these things that seem in opposition. I mean, the right has since the 60s said, oh, the 60s were terrible because liberalism and free love and too much, identity politics and blah, 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 all the stuff that they hate about things around the 60s. But they came out of the 60s as well. A kind of an extreme, idea of liberty had its both left and right results that both had their taproots in the 60s. And so that's sort of the new idea I had about the 60s after spending, a couple of years wallowing in them.
The book is called True Believers, and it creates the differentiation between people who stuck with it and people who, to use the cliche, sold out. There are rich, very successful people who are indifferent to their 60s ideology in that book. Does that reflect the world you live in?
Oh, I mean,
are there really true believers?
You mean still people who
claim the 60s ideals?
Yeah, there are. I mean, and sometimes they are, sometimes it's a vanity. I know, a well-to-do woman who lives in a nice apartment and has a nice car and a nice country house, and still talks about herself as a Bolshevik and a Trotskyist. And I wonder, interesting. And so, is she a true believer? I think so. And then of course there are people like Bernadine Dorn, who was a weather person, famous weather person, radical, who I once actually was at a conference with in Aspen, Colorado, while I was working on the book, and I just stalked her the entire weekend just to see what that person was like, so I could write about her. But and she clearly is some kind of true believer. So sure, not everybody is a sellout, and of course, sellout in that sense is sellout as defined by completely I know everything self-righteous 19-year-olds in 1969. So I wouldn't, and it's. And maybe they're right, and the narrator of this novel thinks that, it grants that the things that her granddaughter says, with whom she has a very close relationship, that she's annoying, but she's not all wrong about, all the flavors of selling out, and about her very 19-year-old, somewhat simplistic ideas of how the world works and how the evil people run it.
So you are committed to books. You're writing at least one more now. You're obviously committed to the written word and the journalism, and yet you're an internet activist of sorts. You've started websites. You build web businesses. You're crossing both ways, if you will, these days. What do you think about the state of print and journalism right now? And are your views on that evolving? You and I have been saying for a long time, the digital future, pretty committed to it, but where are we right now here?
It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. I was excited by, what the potential and the opportunities of the web and digital as soon as they happened, and felt, in fact, my first digital entrepreneurial thing, which we began this website called Inside.com. We started in 1999. And at the time, I swear to God, I felt like, oh my, this whole thing is almost over. We got to start our band before the 60s end kind of feeling. And what's been interesting to me and surprising to me is that 20 years in, 25 since the web was invented, 20 since browsers were introduced. That I'm not sure I thought, oh, it'll all be stable and figured out by 2004, but kinda. I mean, the period of flux is extraordinarily long, and you and I were talking earlier today about how in certain parts of the media industry, people running places are shockingly still acting as though the internet, it's still there, but we can still keep doing what we do the way we've always done it. I'm surprised that exists, but I'm also surprised that, as I said, that the flux is going on. I'm surprised too that I haven't seen yet the journalistic entities come out indigenously from the digital world, from the web, that look to me yet to be extraordinary institutions that I couldn't live without and that will become the New York Times of tomorrow. I don't see that yet. And I kind of figured I would, but.
You started inside.com, that was the site Kurt referred to, with an obvious point of view that a site about media and all the different media was needed in the complicated world we live in. It was a very successful site creatively. Among other things, it brought to national attention a gentleman that many people in this room love and now more, David Carr. Tell us about inside.com and why it made sense then, and why wouldn't it make sense?
It didn't make sense then, and it might make sense now. It made sense to us because it seemed as though it made sense on two levels. That one thing we thought just we didn't consider it a trade publication, but it covered the whole entertainment media landscape, and so we thought, well, Variety and the Hollywood Reporter are these not very good, not especially good publications,